Dara, excuse me for that. We don't have a microphone and we're using Zoom to record our audio and to do for us in person, but also to do what looks to be quite a few people online, actually. 14 already, and we've just ticked over 5:30. Every time you hear one of those ding dongs, that's somebody else coming in to join us online. So today I'm going to try and get a lot of ground covered in an hour and a half. Probably the thing that you're most interested in is the Q&A with the farmers that have done open woodland restoration. So as you would expect from a downer like me, I'm going to put that right at the end so that you have to do a bit of work for me for the open woodlands restoration before we get into the Q&A. But let's start with what is open woodlands restoration and a bit of the story. So thank you. What we're looking for is a situation where you don't have too few trees or too many trees, but a sweet spot of trees. Now, when Australians, as we think of them, rather than the Indigenous traditional owners of 60,000 years, came to this part of the world, the science was very complex to understand the interactions between soils, grasses, and rainfall. And unfortunately, they were looking for simple instead of accurate answers. And so the simple answer was that trees and grass compete for every 100 mils of rainfall. And therefore, what you have is decreasing grass productivity with increasing numbers of trees. And that paradigm led to us clearing the land for 200 years. And it's only been through fantastic research science and people like Sue Ogilvie in the audience starting to show us the relationship between economic outcomes and tree proximity, for example, that start to teach us that there is a sweet spot that occurs where you've got a balance between the trees cycling different levels of nutrients and the grasses cycling from another level of nutrients, and the water and evaporation and the microclimate and the biodiversity and the interaction between those minerals, moisture, and natural processes going on. So how do we, in a landscape that's been largely cleared, replicate the not too many trees, which you can think of in a lot of cases as the national parks, and not too few trees, which you often see eroding in the landscape with poorer and poorer soils and not enough shade and shelter to provide protection for the farmers? Well, the answer is you need to let trees, shrubs, and grasses establish in an open and clumpy style of ecosystem where there's multiple stories, where there's enough space for grasslands, where there's enough shade for different types of grasses, where there's enough symbiosis between them. And so a design was hatched, and we're going to hear from Dr. Jeff Kay, an ecologist in Woodland's ecosystems, talk about this design. But essentially it looks like tram tracks, direct seeded, so that what emerges is what's suitable for that microclimate, and a large gap before another set of tram tracks quite close together, direct seeded, and another gap, and then you repeat. Thank you, James. And what that tends to create is great biodiversity outcomes, better productivity outcomes. And in Australia, we have a carbon market, which is governed by methods. There is a method for planting trees. It's called environmental plantings. And if you plant trees, you could choose to plant them arboretum style, one every 3.5 meters going in this direction and in that direction. And you get a uniformity of canopy, a uniformity of trees, and growth of the same type of trees at the same age. And you miss out on that open and clumpy woodland design. What we've been able to do with the open and clumpy direct seeded tram tracks that have those gaps is still get the trees to the minimum 2 meter height that they need to get to, and the 20% canopy that is a requirement for them to then be considered a carbon forest. And so what you've done is you've gone from no carbon counted towards the Australian method by having cleared land to carbon that is now counted under the Australian carbon method. And that generates for the landholder carbon credits. And those can be sold to receive a new income stream. And so you have from this design the ability to get a carbon outcome leading to new income, biodiversity outcomes leading to greater resilience and better condition of the environment, and productivity increases. And so we might just look at a woodland station, and you might be expecting that within a whole farm, when you break up the land management units, there'll be riparian areas, there'll be cleared areas, there'll be existing wooded areas, there might be cropping or irrigated or other activities. So when you look at a whole farm, you're looking for land management units that make sense, that are already cleared, that could be restored. So in this case, we're looking at a farm in the Southern Tablelands, about 4,000 hectares, and there's several project areas that could be identified. Next slide, please. And so on one area, you might use the same design, but alter it for that terrain. Alter it in terms of whether you're doing 100% direct seeding, or maybe you might actually only do 50% direct seeding and you need to do 50% tube stock because it's inappropriate or inaccessible to do direct seeding. And then there might be areas where those cleared areas are surrounded by existing trees, but you need to consider fencing, because fencing is important when you're establishing trees, because deers, goats, sheep, cattle, everything likes to eat new trees. And if your purpose is to get the trees to 2 meters tall and 20% canopy cover, you can't have them eaten out. And so there's different ways of dealing with the ecosystem that's in front of you. One of the interesting things is we're dealing with a long-term investment in productivity, carbon, and biodiversity. So one thing I'll tell you is this isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. This is a design that will take trees 5 to 7 years in this environment to get to the point where they're contributing carbon. And at the moment, most of the costs are in fencing and upfront design and in direct seeding or tube stock. And that's worn by the proponent at this stage. And so once you start generating carbon credits, which are the only form of substantial income at the moment from doing open woodland, but we're looking at stacking. Once you get that carbon, it takes a while to pay off those initial costs. But over the course of a 25-year project, it has an increased return in terms of productivity and a really good internal rate of return overall on 25 years. But there's no doubting in my mind that, you know, the participation, whilst farmers wear the upfront costs and it's got such a delay until it pays off, it's not going to go mainstream. And so what we've seen with open woodlands restoration is typically it's the innovator pioneer styles of farmers that are looking to put more trees in their landscape. And this aligns with what they want to do. We won't see the ability for this design to crawl across the least productive areas of a farm and upgrade them, or crawl across the broader landscape and give us connectivity and biodiversity corridors until we overcome that funding issue, or that financing issue. But we will start to see, pioneers adopting this, and it start to be a genuine intervention that makes sense for landholders to do at scale. And that helps us achieve biodiversity outcomes, restoration of box gum grassy woodlands, and even meeting national and even farm level carbon credit requirements. Next one, please. So we do like open woodlands restoration. You'll hear a bit more about me and the organisation Regen Farmers Mutual a bit later. But I would suggest to you that instead of hearing about, somebody who's not doing this, talking about it. Let's hear from the farmers that have done this. And so first of all, I would like to introduce, next slide, please. Oh, we will also look at analysis of the opportunity on your farm, but as I promised, that's before the Q&A at the end of this program. So next slide, please. So we're going to hear stories about the open woodland restoration. We're going to hear three of the probably many stories that are out there. The first one is going to be from Dr. Jeff Kay. The second one will be from James Campbell, and the third one from Chris Comore. So Jeff, I'm going to ask you if you would to come off mute, and I'm going to mute myself. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to turn up. Jeff, do you have slides you want to do?
I do, yeah. And I just thought I'd flick to those in a moment, but just wanted to say hello to everyone. And Wardy, actually, can you just help us out? Can you maybe point the camera to the room a little bit, just for a moment, just so I can sort of see who's there and all. G'day, everyone. Sorry I can't be there. I actually just recently had a hip replacement and in the trenches of not being very mobile at the moment, and I'm not allowed to drive either. So I would love to have been there, but I'm not able to, unfortunately, because this is my jam. This topic and what we'll speak about today is very much close to my heart a lot of the time. Thanks, Wardy. I might just see if my sharing will work. And I've tried to keep this as descriptive as possible in my absence of being able to be there.
Can everyone see Jeff now?
Not the slides though, Woody.
They might be on their way now. And I don't know. Can I get a sense of if that's in present mode, please?
Yep, that looks good to me.
Yeah, so it's all good. Okay, great. And I can't see anything or anyone while I'm in this mode. So just to let you know, if anyone's got a hand up or something, I won't be able to see. But I just wanted to just sort of unpack a project. This is my family farm, Warminda, that I'm now running and have been for the last several years. It's where I grew up. It's a place I know very well. It's out near Murrum Bateman, near Yass, in some pretty arable country. And I'm also, in addition to just farming, I wasn't always farming. I was an ecologist, so I've spent a long time working in woodlands, particularly around restoring biodiversity back to woodlands. And I approached, I guess, the custodianship of this land as an opportunity to practice some of the intentions of restoring biodiversity, but also trying to make it feasible and cost effective along the way. So this is a snapshot of Warminda, and this is kind of an image that is, you can see these tram tracks forming. They're not there yet because this is a picture of the site preparation of the property. But I guess just before I dive into the site, I just want to unpack a little bit about me and to give you a sense for those whom we haven't met in the past. So I studied woodland ecology. I conducted a PhD many years ago now, looking at how to implement government policy to improve uptake of initiatives like the carbon initiative that is current, where landholders become stewards of land, and we basically fund for the stewardship over termed agreements over time. And through that work and that experience, it drew me to walking through most of New South Wales woodlands environments, surveying for all sorts of fauna for about 10 years. And over that time, I suppose I sort of put in stark contrast the challenge we have in southeastern New South Wales, particularly in this area here in the Highlands, where we've got overcleared landscapes and really quite urgent need for active restoration in these landscapes as well. And so, what we're talking about today is really limited to one type of vegetation type. This works in box gum grassy woodlands primarily because they're naturally quite open, or can be quite open, ecosystems. They're also really endangered, so it's really imperative that we don't sit on our hands, in my opinion, and wait too long. We've got to get these woodlands back in the landscape. It's a really critical part of our biodiversity and our whole livelihood. So it's certainly one of the driving features of why I was very eager to embark on this. And woodlands are really dominated. I mean, we all think about the trees, but they're really primarily dominated or by a rich ground cover of native grasses and forbs. And obviously with this project, we can't really talk about restoring those at this stage. We're just focusing on trying to get that intact overstory back in place. And I think through time and in succession, we will be able to continue to work on those ground covers with this design. I think having access for machinery to pass in between trees allows endless opportunities for enhanced restoration over time, which is one of the reasons I like this area. So about coming out of COVID and during those times when we took over the farm, we had a look at what options were there, and the environmental plantings pilot came out as an option right at the same time that I was planning to plant this out anyway. So my heart was to plant this out at my own cost, but this opportunity through the carbon funding made that far more feasible and a much quicker opportunity for us to take hold on. But here what you can see in the image is an example of this exact system we've trialed, but we did it in 2010. So in 2010, I planted a big chunk of our farm out to, an open closed woodland design. That is the inspiration for this work. And what's great is we're able to look at those patches now and just review how they've gone and what we're up to with those. So this is the property, Warminda. It's only small, so it's 50 hectares, which means I can primarily try to seek this as a task I can try to tackle myself. I appreciate many people will have larger blocks and won't have the same situation that I do, where I've done everything except for the seeding myself, which I've managed to get some help from a local land care group to do. But the ground covers are primarily pasture improved. They haven't been fertilised for, I'd say, the last 25 years, but there is a dominance of phalaris, and in fact, very arable country. So the biggest challenge was trying to control the existing vegetation to create the opportunity for planting. We've also been really lightly rotationally grazing and had a whole philosophy around that. And so it has meant that at the time that we started this project, there was a massive amount of biomass. And this project was approved in 2022, and that was about the beginning of the La Nina event that then lasted and kind of hasn't really, was only starting to sort of return back into a dry cycle now here. And so we've had this really competitive period where we've tried to establish this. It's been really hard. But there were 3 stages. So stage 1 was really about getting through the registrations and negotiations. And as I said, we started this in 2022. There was not much guidance at all around various designs. And I became increasingly concerned about arboretum style plantings that don't match the ecology and that create threats and problems for landholders, and reduce the opportunity for landholders to undertake actual farming activities that many would want to continue to do, such as grazing in these landscapes. So I had a very extensive set of conversations with the Clean Energy Regulator around this particular design, and we robustly thrashed out, I guess, the principles of the Act and also of the legislation, but also then what I was planning to do on the ground. And we came to some arrangement after some time, which is what Wardy and what we're going to talk about. But there was a lot of work in this stage one, but it's all pretty achievable. Like I said, I did it all myself, but you can certainly don't see it as a hurdle. It's definitely pretty doable. Probably the harder part for me was the site prep. I had to spend 3 years. So I've spent 3 years slashing and spraying through this thick phalaris. But and many people won't have this challenge, but what I found amazing was that with that effort, I was able to achieve it. I got a success. So I was able to get those areas back down to a colonizable state for seed. I was worried about that. The design is, for me, it worked really well because I was able to just do 2 boom spray passes on my little tractor. And so it meant quite efficient application of the treatment. And we also had constant grazing pressure up until the day that essentially we put the seeds in the ground. So we tried to combat that through site prep. And so this is an image of the property now or then, and this is what it looks like now after that site prep and the treatment of those vegetation. And I actually, sometimes I find it hard to deal with the linear nature of the lines I've drawn. That's purely an efficiency thing. It's simply so that the long-term goal is the entire property is scattered with trees, and I fully accept that some parts of the property will not grow trees at the same densities that other parts will. So we'll end up with quite a scattered and nice approach in the end. You could, create more innovative designs and squiggles and things, but remember that the Clean Energy Regulator has guidance around ensuring that your methods are consistent in every paddock, and so this was the simplest way to achieve that. It also means a lot easier management down the track once those trees are grown. As I said, had some issues along the way in all the site prep. There's a wheel hanging lopsided on my other tractor there. And you can see the height of the phalaris that I was trying to combat in the early years. But we finally got through to stage 3, which commenced in 2023. And here's a nice image here of Tom, and I don't know if Tom's there, Wardy, but of Tom doing the seeding for me in the tram track design that Wardy's described in the treated areas. So it made for a very efficient afternoon. In one afternoon, they seeded essentially one afternoon. They did the half of the whole farm. For a day, they would have easily managed across the whole 50 hectares. And this is the power of broad scale restoration through direct seeding. It's just so efficient when you compare it to something like tube stock planting. And I think both have a place. Tube stocks have benefits as well, but in terms of simply getting coverage, and I didn't have much money, so getting that cost really low for the number of seeds we wanted deployed across the landscape, this was the way to go. We've targeted a massive mix of very woodland specific species. So this is the ecological integrity of this approach is really high. We are actively trying to restore a critically endangered ecosystem in the species mix we've selected. As I mentioned earlier, it's really dominated at the overstory at this stage, but I see my custodianship of this land as a successional thing, and I'm fortunate to be still in my mid-40s, so I've got time ahead of me to continue to push this whole journey forward, which will be nice. But this is definitely a strong starting point, and you can see some images of the trees that as they've been growing along in amongst the pastures. And so, I think probably the main thing is, getting a good sense of the geometry, and this tram track template that we've got is most of the way there. Don't undercut your site prep when it comes to doing this. In fact, do a bit more than you think, just in case, because you don't get the chance to really come back and treat those areas once those seeds are in very easily. And as I said, there was a backstory with how much work I went to through the regulator now, and we're constantly trying to demonstrate a best case here. Like, I would love to take to the regulator an example of a project that not only meets the targets of the legislation, but also actively seeks to empower biodiversity in this landscape and get best practice ecological restoration of these woodlands demonstrated that works in partnership with farming. We fully intend to graze these areas again in the future when the trees are large enough. And I think through this compromise of open space and closed space, we're meeting both goals with the woodland, but also with from a biodiversity perspective, but also from a production perspective. It's about the best case I think you could expect to get when you're trying to solve these multiple objectives. And so now, essentially, we're just watching the trees grow, and I'm just trying to help as many others who are interested in this as possible to achieve the same outcomes we've got. And I know, Wardy, we might have an opportunity, and I just wanted to say that everyone here would be welcome to come and visit the farm to have a look at a time that's right. I think maybe in April there may be an opportunity. But yeah, I'd really encourage people to come and see the site and come to see something material for what we're trying to achieve.
So, thank you. Everybody here looks like they're waiting to ask questions, and the sad truth is they're all going to have to wait. I'm using the ability to talk to yourself and Jim and Chris further as the carrot to get to the end, to get to 7 o'clock. Okay, so if you can bear with us. Thank you, Jeff. Stick around, please, for the Q&A. I'm going to introduce James Campbell up now. And Jim, while you're coming up, James, have you got his slides or PDF ready to go? Okay. Thank you, Jeff. By the way, Jim is part of Regen Farmers Mutual, which I'll talk to you about. In fact, he's the chair of our steering committee. Jim has done a lot to get this project off, including telling us to apply for the New South Wales grant 3 years ago, which got us onto a field trip, which Mel Henry in the audience was able to suggest we go to Jeff Kay's place. And it was upon seeing Jeff demonstrate clearly how this can be done at scale and simply that Jim got inspired. So Jim, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'd like you to share your story in front of the camera.
I'm going to stand in front of the camera. Do you want to just put it in preso mode? Just put that one there. Hi everyone. Right, I've got to stay still. Hi everyone. Firstly, Jeff Kay is kind of the reason. He's the who you just heard from very appropriately to hear from him. Honestly, we were shelving the whole carbon project idea on the back of not being able to have an opportunity to graze beyond that 25-year period. So next slide. Bear with me. You're right. So I think the best way to describe, what we're doing is to just highlight the strategy. So, our strategy is to deploy the landed assets at Top Yarraman to their highest and best use to achieve a sustainable grazing operation supported by income streams or alternative income streams from natural capital assets. It's taken a little minute, but if you look at the place as it is today, the orange area there is a biodiversity stewardship offsets program, and the bulk of that orange area, probably 80% of it, is timber country. So relatively valueless in the scheme of a grazing operation, but is by and large on majority box gum grassy woodland. So the threatened ecological community that is being set aside as a perpetual biodiversity offsets program with the New South Wales Biodiversity Conservation Trust. That's all I'm going to say about that part. This session is on the carbon project, which is the blue area. So that's a 77.7 hectare, let's call it 78 hectare area that came about actually as a result of a September 2023 natural capital assessment on the place. I was fortunate that at the time, and I still am, working with a UK-based impact fund called Kibis, and my day job is running assets for funds and private equity. These being an impact fund were particularly driven by doing, creating more with less. And to that end, I was able to leverage some of the knowledge I'd gained in that corporate arena to find the right people to help us assess this from a natural capital perspective. What we found was that southern end, north's this end, that southwest end was higher in sequestration than the other end, albeit the other end is okay. But certainly when we looked at it from our highest and best use aspect, it became certainly clear that going down this track would work. We put the brakes on pretty quickly when we realised we couldn't graze under the then existing method, and it wasn't until Wardy's circular description happened that we happened upon Jeff, who then helped us along with Christoph Burr, Simon Campbell, others, to get into this project. Next slide. Pretty wordy. I'm not going to even begin to go through, all of that. Essentially, it's a 78 hectare project. We're aiming to, on a net basis, deliver 40,000 accus. There's a lot of sort of unknowns here, and I think I was talking to the team today about just optionality, finding optionality in what we do, and we don't know as a group or as a community what's around the corner, but what was in scoping this out, what we did do was say, well, imagine if one day we have to inset our emissions as producers. Well, what this does on the options basis is it does actually allow us to inset 85% of the emissions of that place. So we did get an assessment done on our emissions, work off 3,500 ewes plus followers plus 100 cattle. So no surprises, 90% of those emissions are methane based, as is usual in a grazing operation. So it's kind of a nice to know. My view on that is there would need, if we are all going carbon neutral, well, there does need to be an underlying premium to attach to that, because that cost of staying in business on current margins would be difficult to justify. What we're doing here is replacing that threatened ecological community. So exactly what Jeff said. I don't need to say too much more, but it's a bit like what he said as far as Blakely's box gum grassy woodland threatened ecological community. It stands up as a good thing to do, but it's also a financial decision that makes sense. And I think Wardy wanted me to particularly emphasise that element of how we came to this decision and the decision process. Those two pictures there, one's the prep, the top one's the spray prep. So we actually bought this block about 2 years after we bought the main block, and it was pretty much covered in serrated tussock, so we nuked it. And what that did is it took away all the competition. in taking away the competition, it enabled us to sow into or seed into a pretty handy bed. That was actually, it was pretty dry when Tom came and did the seeding, and we were all, what do we think we do? So let's just go for it. And fortunately, we had some reasonable rain afterwards. Pretty dry autumn, but at the end of the day, these are native seeds. They are surrounded by their ancestors. Like we're back onto a national park. It's like you sit there and say, this is risk. Well, there's trees everywhere. Like we're not doing something exotic here. We're actually doing what was already here some time ago. So yes, there's a risk factor. There always is, but it kind of goes into the thinking. James, I thought this was useful just in terms of what the Clean Energy Regulator saw to enable our open woodland to gain approval. We've gone a little wider than 15. We've gone to 20. And what's ultimately happening, if you've seen these in their glory, these box gum species, you know how large they get. The thing here is that what we're getting away from here is that standard tram track, you can never graze here because you've just created a national park, to actually having that grass, those native grasses in amongst these these native ukes that actually ultimately derive you a net benefit from a grazing capacity over a long-term basis. Because yes, over 25 years, there's good project gains. But if I'm unable to do anything after 25 years, well, what good is it, in other words? So we are always about thinking about the long term, because it's not the highest and best use for 25 years. It's the highest and best use over a period. And then what does that actually translate to? Next one. Okay, so it's the money slide. So in thinking about this, the first thing I want to say is this is the decision making, or the quantitative element of the decision making that we came up with, and this is our stuff. So I'm going to put the hazards out there, which I said down in the bottom there. This is all unique to Top Yarraman, right? This is not your farm, and it's not your farm. This is our farm, okay? Every asset is very different. We have done some work. We've done a fair bit of work. But I have not seen a single ACCU nor made a single dollar. Okay, so I'm not sitting here saying, oh, you should jump into this. What I'm saying is this is what we've done, and this is what the numbers told us and justified us into doing. We also have a cracking group of people in our corner. So you've heard from Jeff, Christoph, from Mutual, Simon Campbell, Tom and Tom. We did not go into this and just went, right, this is just like one of those land care grants and go for it, even though we've done a fair bit of seeding in the past, because this is a little bit of big boys' toys, because you don't want to get this wrong, because there's a lot more rigmarole and administration around it. It's not scary. It's just there's quite a bit at stake now once you're starting to make some material returns. So on the returns piece, so that area that I showed you in light blue is relatively steep. The team were there today. We can get around it on a bike. We can pretty much access all of it on a bike. It's not too bad, but it's pretty rough, and it's probably the roughest part of the place, which ironically, it was also the highest sequestering area on the place. For us, we felt that it would run 5 DSE. So we were working off running a group of weathers out there, say 350 odd, and that we were taking a fleece off a year, say $50 a fleece, right? Call it a 5 kilo fleece at $10 now. We know wool's at 14 or whatever, but we've also seen it in the scraping the bottom of the barrel too. So those numbers, and I thought, because I dug up my models and I went, you know what, I'm just going to put the models that I had at the time to show you what I was thinking at the time. So pretty straightforward, and I would suggest to probably all of us that know a little bit about running weathers that they're kind of pretty straightforward, pretty robust style of animals. Those numbers, give or take, it's probably the carrying capacity where we could have a discussion. But on our farm, we felt that was the number. Okay. When we looked at the project itself, the key component, the key variable in this is the yield, and you can see from that board over there. What's the bloke in the pink shirt's name?
Joe. Yes.
Joe. That Joe brought along, that the sequestration yield across our area varies quite significantly. And I certainly caution everybody around that point. Know your numbers is the point. The financial bit's one bit, but the actual drivers of those are key. So know your yield, and ensure that you get the support, obviously mutual, to get you at least on the way to commencing some assumptions. And to me, that's the starting point. So we know our yield. As far as price goes, based on the ACCU curve and some of the numbers that I've seen, and certainly the underlying fundamentals of what we know as the safeguard mechanism, the average price over a 25-year period, I plugged in at $73. Today, it's around 38 to 40. We know there is an urgency, or there is certainly times are coming with respect to these safeguard mechanisms, and so that is probably the main driver of market values of ACCU. So we felt that was an appropriate style of number, and I didn't worry about inflation adjustment. I essentially just put a growth on there. So I've got my yield and I've got my price and I know my area. Now, the slide that Wardy put up before with respect to that impact on grazing early, what we did, and I think it is probably too conservative, but it was a way of penalising that scenario two being the carbon project and seeing how robust it was. I told you that we didn't want to do any projects unless we could graze it. But what I did here was I pulled back the carrying capacity by 60%. Right. So I basically gave myself a far lower number of animals that I could graze on there to see what actually happened, with respect to, it's almost going carbon or livestock. I'll just put a bit of livestock back in. As opposed to, this is going to give shelter. I can now use it as landing paddock. Everything's going to happen and I'm off to the races. It was probably too conservative, but it still made the outcome far more compelling than running my 350 weathers on 78 hectares. So ultimately, on a gross margin basis, on a like versus like, I was coming in at about $342 a hectare on the weathers, and I'm coming in over $1,200 a hectare on the carbon over a 25-year period. So when I ran a net present value of cash flows, and I mucked around with it a little bit, but in the main, I'm well over 100 to 120% ahead on a project basis. Now, because I already owned the land, I didn't have a situation where I was buying land, so to speak. Some people are looking to genuinely acquire country, so they'd have to put the land value in there. I already had the land, so it came back to being a project versus project. But if you were buying land, you would obviously have to put that in, which would actually bring back your ultimate return. I won't ask whether there's any questions because there probably will be, and we'll do it at the end. But that is as simple as I can explain it. There is a lot that's sort of gone into the thinking and workings to get those numbers, but in essence, it was gross margin versus gross margin based on confidence around drivers, primarily carbon yield and to a lesser extent price. But when I do price adjust, particularly, I'm still well ahead at market value. Yep. I just thought this might be interesting, just to from a timeline perspective. A lot gets lost in all these sort of war stories, but we applied in May 2024. We received the approval by the Clean Energy Regulator in September 24. There were police checks. There was a forestry approval. We had a reasonable level of administration that Christoph mainly supported all of that, fronted it on commercial terms, which we were very grateful for. First ground prep November 2024. So you're actually not allowed to touch the project until it's approved. So you have to do any groundwork post approval. So quite quickly post approval, we did those sprays. Second spray happened in March 25. Between March and June, we completed the seeding. It took 3 days or so. 3 days in the Hilux from the Toms, and then we actually ended up getting on Amazon and getting some of those little veggie seeders to do the steep stuff. And it was, I should have a photo on there, but there's just us in our giggle hats just poking along with a veggie seeder and honestly trying to replicate nature. We did run out of seed, so we were a bit generous. So we had to ring the Tom and we had to get some urgent deliveries, but we got there, and sort of, so we're done. We then got an email that said, actually, I think Jeff Kay's in a little bit of strife. He's been he's had to explain himself to the Clean Energy Regulator, and so I thought, oh, this will be interesting. So in Jeff went. And in true Jeff style, he came out with flying colours with an approval, a ratified approval under the open canopy, the canopy distance approach. So I thought, right, well, while the iron's hot, guys, we're going straight in after that. And so Jeff and Christoph promptly came back and helped us go through that extra hurdle, given the Clean Energy Regulator's interest in this style of open woodland project. So we are where we are, and I intend on putting that first offsets report in around June 2027. Our style is to make sure that these things are up and to ascertain that we've actually got this happening. If you go and apply for ACCUs and you get ACCUs and you don't have the trees up, you've actually got to give your ACCUs back. So we're quite keen to make sure that what we've got is there. So right now we're out there today and everyone's on their hands and knees looking at sort of little acacias coming up in tiny little areas, and you could be forgiven for thinking it looks like a Ponzi scheme because even all the scrapings have been grown over. But as I sort of half joked, but I am quite serious, I like to think in 2 years' time this will be a very different looking paddock, and then within that sort of 5 to 7 that we will be stocking it again, hopefully at higher than 40% than as the current. But so far, we're on the road and we're looking forward to seeing how it goes.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Great following, Jeff. And I'm sure there is going to be just as many questions for Jim as there are for Jeff, probably more around the finances. Guess what? You got to wait till the end. So I'm going to ask Chris Comore to join us. So at the same time as James and myself were enjoying Jeff's company for the first time, another member of that audience was Chris Comore from Willow Bend Station. And Chris, we describe open woodland restoration as a lot of stories coming together. So I'd like you to tell your story as much as you feel comfortable. What's worked, what's been challenges, what hasn't, you know, where have you got to? And then there'll be Q&A afterwards.
First, I have to begin with, if everyone would look at their flyer for tonight, because there's been a major artificial intelligence glitch. I think Wardy must have asked, send me a photo of Willow Bend Station to put in the flyer. Well, the photo in the flyer is not of Willow Bend Station, because the sheep are crossbred and not merinos. It's in fact a prime lamb operation, I think run by Tom Bull, who's a very good operator, down at Holbrook. No doubt future AI glitches will say that AUKUS began in a Holbrook, but that's insane. So really, Wardy, I think you owe me a long neck.
No, do it.
Because you put crossbred sheep instead of nice merinos, and you didn't have my property there. But that's fine. We forgive you because your passion and intelligence is why we're here. We're not nearly as far along as James. We've got a 30-hectare paddock in the northwest, which counterintuitively is quite bare, but I'm told by Tom and others, it probably is your best candidate because there won't be so much competition. We traditionally, over the last 30 years, have put in tree lots, 1.1, 1.2 kilometers, about 30 meters connectivity. But this project has challenged us. And my role has been to help Wardy and his team come up with the documents. So we've had lots of jousting in a serious way in Zoom meetings with a team of lawyers to come up with the hopefully templates for future much larger projects than ours. So one of the issues we've had to talk about is, well, where is a farmer responsible and where is, in this case, Regen? We're the project proponent, primarily because of our size allows a lesser audit fee, and Regen might be the project proponent on larger projects, and the farmer just stands aside as a landowner. But we are there as the proponent. But because, in a sense, I'm just a farmer, I don't know anything about this area, we rely on other expertise like James, who is our service provider. But you need documents for this. So let's first start with terms of reference for the main agreement if we're borrowing money, and we acted as if we should borrow money for this project, which doesn't really need a loan. It's not that expensive, but let's just go through the exercise. And then you get in all sorts of problems, such as, well, force majeure, something comes out of left field. Whose responsibility is it? Is it the farmers, or is it Regen who's got us into this mess? Well, most of the time I've had to argue against myself, and that was my role, that if I put in a paddock of wheat and things go wrong, that's my problem. If locusts come, if an earthquake comes, is it my problem, or is it, legal term, some major force that really interrupts the contract and is not my problem? Well, an earthquake probably would be, but kangaroos hopping the fence would be my problem. And anytime you put in a grain crop or pasture crop, if drought comes along and ruins it, again, that's my problem. So we worked on these agreements to say, what's a farmer's responsibility and what is Regen's responsibility? And then from the point of view of getting expertise to help me, what is James's responsibility? Well, I love the proposed contract with James because basically everything is on him. There's very little I have to do except pay him. And that then, of course, leads to the question of the budget. Because under the plans that we're coming up with, a farmer is committed to a budget that he has to agree with, and then probably will be required, as I am being required, to put aside, our case, 25% in case things go wrong. Then we had to discuss, well, wait, what things can go wrong? Replanting risk? Okay, that's fair enough. But how about other problems that really aren't just a replanting problem? Well, we're still trying to work that one out. Yeah. So my role has been in the last several months of Zoom calls with a very good firm of lawyers, Mills Oakley, and they've actually assigned one lawyer to act for me, Chinese wall, in these discussions, to come up with the roadmap for future and hopefully much bigger projects. So the agreement between me and the lender has the usual borrower and lender questions, but in our case, it's mixed in with this carbon world, which again, I don't pretend to get into, and I think that was one of the reasons. Chris, we don't want you to know much about it. We know you don't anyhow. Rely on expertise. And on a personal basis, we're in it for the journey, not the destination. Are there going to be carbon credits at the end? Well, you've got regulatory risk, you've got carbon market risk, you've got counterparty risk. We're in it because we've done tree lots for 30 years, and this is a really much bigger lot. And there's a lot of biodiversity in this. So we think that's why we should do this. If credits come along in the end, great. On the current system or current project with Regen, they're not taking any risk because the only carbon credits they get are the ones necessary to repay the loan. After that, it's all mine. Whether that's going to happen or not, who knows? I know James is much more of a deep institutional and financial fellow who quite necessarily had to go in those numbers. But I think a lot of farmers won't really have that expertise. And I think we'll be going into it more for the journey than the destination. We'll see. What else can I say at this point?
That's pretty good, Chris. I want to have people ask you in the Q&A more questions. In case you didn't know, Chris is because he gave me shit about the crossbred lambs. He's a former attorney, but I don't want you to hold that against him because we all love lawyers, don't we? Yeah.
What happens when you cross a pig with a lawyer?
Oh, I don't know.
Nothing. Some things even a pig won't do.
Thank you. I love the one from my late father. Was in a town with one lawyer. The lawyer does conveyancing and wills and probate and things. In a town with two lawyers, they both make a fortune. Because now they can fight one another. James, could you go back to the slide presentation? So guys, we've heard 3 stories. Open Woodland Restoration is about your story. It's about the stories that have come over the last 60,000 years, the last 200 years, the last 3 years, or the last 15 years. If you could move forward, please. That was Jeff. And Jim.
She's made us young.
There you go. Same coat. And Chris. If you don't mind. Then the next one, if you don't mind, James. There is another story, one of Regen Farmers Mutual. So back in COVID times, if you recall, nobody could go anywhere. And if you wanted to talk to your grandkids, you had to learn Skype or Zoom. And so we all got very good at operating online. Rowan Clark, who's online in the audience, and myself were fortunate enough to take a group of farmers through a co-design process because we saw agricultural and environmental markets were converging. And we asked the question, would a cooperative be a useful structure where farmers own it and they get advice that's unbiased because farmers own it, and it can help them navigate the convergence of environmental and agricultural markets. And out of this COVID process of 80 farmers, the vast majority of them said yes, and they set up a members council where James became the chair of the members council. We've had a group of about 15 people meeting every fortnight to help us move the organisation through since 2021. What we discovered is that we work really well with groups of farmers rather than individual farmers, and that what we can do is actually, across multiple farms, create landscape scale impact, and that scale brings benefit to the individual farmers that they just can't get on their own. When you team up, you get buying power, negotiating power, peer-to-peer learning. You get landscape scale impacts. So instead of islands of biodiversity, you can create corridors of biodiversity. Next slide, please. And so running one of these landscape impact programs, we came across Jeff. Jim got to follow quickly in Jeff's shoes. Chris has followed since and been registered. We have another 3 that we expect to register before the end of the financial year. Another 7 that we would look to register before October of this year. Most of those 10 will start planting in May 2027. But that's what, 13 farmers in a district of 8,000 odd farmers. So our open woodland restoration story doesn't just have to be about Regen Farmers Mutual and a couple of individual farmers. If we're trying to make it a landscape story, we have to bring in other partners. So we've been fortunate to be working with the local land services, particularly Mel Henry. With the New South Wales government, we were able to start this process because of a grant from the New South Wales government, and we've got 3 years of funding from this point, again with the New South Wales government, to do the systemisation of open woodland restoration. We have relationships with Burrawa Landcare, Goulburn, Gunning and Yass Area Network, with NRM Regions, with Elders, thank you for being here, Joe, with New South Wales farmers, with the Tablelands farming systems, with Southwest Slopes, and one that hasn't made the list of partners, but more recently we hope Farming for the Future. What bringing all these stories and engaging in other people's stories has given us is 3 sorts of opportunities for those open woodland projects to advance. The first is grants. The second one is for us to all learn about engagement. And the third one is systemisation. So I'm going to start with grants. If we can go to the next page, please. We have grants available for landholders from $1,000 up to $10,000 to look at feasibility and all those pre-registration costs, getting GIS done on your farm so that you can draw a compliant carbon estimation area is not something most farmers have the skills to do. You can use grant funding towards that. In order to lodge application with the Clean Energy Regulator, you're going to need a permanence plan and a reforestation plan, a financial model, eligible interest holder consent. You know, apparently the carbon market exists there for the government to help us create more carbon through sequestration or avoided emissions so that we can meet our national targets. But it's a really hard piece of legislation for the average farmer to negotiate. And these grants are there to help farmers get the advice, whether it's from elders, whether it's from an independent advisor, whether it's from a local or an out-of-towner, that helps you achieve those things that stand in the road of getting a registered project, or even understanding the feasibility, the local design constraints on your farm. So if this is of interest to you, please follow the CER Readiness Grant pathway, which I'll show you in a second. Next one. We also know that open woodland restoration is like, maybe we'll get to sort of 15 farms in this region by October of this year, out of 8,000 farms. What that looks like is you're dealing with the innovators, the pioneers, the leading edge, sometimes called the bleeding edge, right? Because it hurts having to go through these processes with regulators, work out the paperwork. Then what follows the bleeding edge? The leading edge is usually what we'd call early adopters, then the early majority, then the later majority, and then the laggards. You recognize laggards? They're probably not in this room, but they generally have this posture. Yeah? And at each of these points in an adoption curve, people will respond to different language. And with a grant that we've got through NRM Regions Australia, what we'd like to understand is what call to actions resonate with our partners in Landcare, our partners in Elders, our partners in the Farming Systems Group, our partnerships through local media, our partnerships more broadly across the Southern Tablelands region. Do people respond to the social call to action? Oh my God, we're in a climate crisis, let's do this together. Or do people respond to an environmental call to action? Boxgum grassy woodlands is only 3% of its previous extent. It's a threatened ecological community and home to koalas and gliders and everything that we hold dear in terms of bird life. Do people respond to a financial call to action? I can move from 350 weathers earning $350 a hectare to $1,200 a hectare while I'm improving biodiversity, carbon, and potentially my grazing and productivity capacity? Or do people respond to the productivity call to action, shade and shelter, reduction in erosion, ecosystem function, higher fertility, higher or less mortality when it comes to lambing because you've got shade and shelter, reduction in heat stress, reduction in cold stress. Can you move to the next one? And what's really interesting, if we look at Landcare, and when you booked today for the ticket today, whether you were online or in person, you were asked, how did you hear about this project and what call to action kind of inspired you to care about open woodlands restoration? And blue is environmental, right? And red is productivity, and green is financial, and purple, productivity, financial, and purple is social. And you might be able to see that Landcare, it's in the name, Landcare, right? Highly motivated by the environmental call to action. Elders, as you would expect, professional services firm, more interested in the financial and the productivity outcomes. Southern Tablelands Farming Systems Group, relatively well split between financial, productive, and environmental. Not talking about their social, because probably being part of a group of farmers that already have that peer interaction, already experience better negotiating power, better rates, better bargaining power, they're probably getting that social outcome. So what we're going to do over the next 4 months, next slide, please, is we're going to actually test these calls to actions with different audiences so that we can understand how we go from the bleeding edge, first pioneer farmers, and cross that chasm to the early majority. And then we know through the study of tipping points, you won't convince somebody whose posture is this, or a laggard or a late majority, with the same information that convinces a pioneer, right? So we're going to look at different co-design sessions in the next 3 months that look at all of those call to actions. And in the first co-design session, we're going to look at what have we got on our individual farms. Then the second one asks, what's that worth? And we don't just care about the environmental markets as they are today, which is the carbon market, which might have a price between $30 and $300. Nobody can predict that. But emerging biodiversity markets and the premiums that might go along with your food and fiber that you sell. So these other factors come into what is it worth. And then how do we tell our story? How do we communicate that story? Now, if we're talking to farmers, I suspect we need to talk about productivity. And for 200 years, everything was geared around to the point that you couldn't take on a soldier settler block unless you committed legally to clearing it. So everything a farmer heard, and their fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, was that trees and grass compete for moisture, get the trees out of here. We need to tell a more nuanced story about productivity and that sweet spot that comes when trees and grasses are in balance. You don't have too few or too many trees. And so the co-design sessions for individual farmers, for their advisors, and for the government people that are interested in supporting open woodland restoration, that's how you do it. Next slide, please. So online and in person. If you're in person, I want you to pull out your phones. This little QR code is going to take you to, and Rowan, if you're there, maybe could you paste in the chat? Otherwise, I will. The code for the. I'll move out of the road so you can take photos of that QR code. That'll bring up a quiz or a poll. And what we want you to do is answer the questions in the poll. The first question will be, are you a farmer, or are you government, or are you advisor? And what we'd like to see is you complete the questions that are relevant to you. Thanks, guys. For those online, in the chat now, oh, sorry, that's just gone to Libby. Rather, in the chat to everybody, if you follow that link and complete the poll, then if we do that quickly, I'll give you Q&A time with the farmers. All right. In the room, if you finish the poll, put your hand on your head or your hands on the hips. Let me know that you're done. Do you want a hand here?
Yeah, cool.
This is what grandchildren are for. That's your camera, Vic.
Top right.
Top right.
First name.
Yeah, got it. Come on. Viv, I'm just going to enter it in manually.
You think, guys, I've got to the Howard rated conference available, but I don't know whether I want to raise it back.
Oh, I think 1 is less good than 5. 5 is better.
Let's find out.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Let's find out.
Unless you're playing golf. Is that?
Or children.
All right. Thank you, everyone. You're starting to get through it. That's good.
Yes.
Oh, well done to the people online. 25 responses so far. That's very impressive. People in the real life. Come on, what's wrong with you? Hurry up. Hey? How you? Yeah, all the hips. You can do it this way or that way. Okay. Guys, while that's happening, Jeff, if you can hear us, I might get you to come off Zoom and do you mind? Yeah, just go to the next one if you don't mind. Sorry, next slide. The next page. Q&A. Wonderful. Jim, Chris, Jeff, I might bring you guys up on chairs here so that they can see you on there. And then let's take some questions if there are. Rowan, just doing a sound check. Can you hear Jim if he talks? Jim, say something.
Hi, Rowan.
Hey, Jim. Yes, I can.
And
Chris?
Rowan, you can hear me?
I can. You just need to project your voice a bit there, Chris.
Okay.
We've already set other kittens in there.
All right. I'm going to repeat any questions that come from the audience so that the onliners can hear. Who's got the first question? Is it for Jeff, Jim, or Chris?
Stop.
I should have set up a Dorothy Dixer. Who's going to go first? Yes.
Just a question around, I think in the slides that you had there, it was the target or the eventual canopy cover was 70%. Is that right?
29.
29. Okay, so because it was just looking with those plantings, they look very dense. So when those grow up, I mean, are they going to be spread trees or are they just going to be really wall to wall?
Well, they're dense in the tram tracks.
Yeah.
But then they overhang into the mid road.
Yeah.
So ultimately the rule was 20% canopy cover.
Yeah.
And then 200 stems a hectare. So ultimately, in time, it's not going to be the 200 stems because it's got the 20, the gap. But it does hit the 29% canopy cover.
Yeah.
This will it will probably be higher in reality because this was a bit more densely planted than we thought. But yes, it's definitely not 70.
So are these your sweet spot and your density and that is that all to comply with carbon?
Yeah, there's rules. Yeah, it's a
So
compliance.
that's basically what it is to comply with carbon.
Yeah, and that's been the art of this, which is what Jeff paved the way for. So he got into the office of the Clean Energy Regulator. He remember his presentation when he and kind of thrashed that out. Jeff, you're obviously still on.
Yeah, I can happy to talk to that one there, James. Thanks. The legislation requires, it's a little bit, when I went through, and it may have differed under the new, there's a new act now in play to the one I registered under, which was sunset some time ago. I believe it's, if anything, more open now than it was before. But when I went first through, the requirement was a little unclear about whether we ought to be meeting a target of 200 stems per hectare or 20% forest cover, because they're very different things. 200 stems of a yellow box woodland would land you in a dense, overpacked stand of woodland. And in fact, it's kind of counterproductive to the ecology. So if you were trying to recreate an existing woodland, you wouldn't probably get 200 stems per hectare. So through discussions with the regulator, and I'd urge you all to kind of exercise your own comfort here, but it seemed that the percent coverage was the actual marker we needed to really target the most. And that was defined as anything 2 meters either side of a row. So we have this very constrained 4 meter width that we used to calculate and that 29% number. In practice and in reality, the trees will far eclipse that. These trees can get canopies up to nearly 15 meters wide. So they'll be in practice much greater than what the requirement is for forest cover. So that allows for that loss in density as you go down the line. So you will find that they compete themselves out, or some of the seed just won't strike. It's not a guarantee that once you put seed in the ground that little seed will turn into a tree. So overplanting, but in this strip, allows you for that redundancy. It enables you to accept losses because you're oversupplying the seed to what you need. There's no promises with any of this. You could always find you may have to come back and do infill planting. Some people may have to, but that 29% number was a very coarse assessment based on 2 rows at 4 meters each, gives you 8 meters, and then a 20-meter gap in my assessment. So that was basically 8 of 28 is turns out to be that amount. So and this is where the geometry, kind of what I spoke to, is if you wanted to be a bit more conservative, you could probably do what he's suggesting here, which is bring the gap a bit closer together to 15 meters, and then you're increasing your argument for forest cover. But in any event, these systems, if they grow correctly, in 15, 20 years, they'll be scattering tree seed into these interrows, and you'll still be grazing. And if anything, all it's done is enabled you this opportunity to really efficiently enhance your carbon profile right across that land parcel. Like, you won't be able to stop regen from occurring over time, and that's actually the ideal state, because it will allow for a highly resilient system that allows for the object, which is biodiversity and carbon and production. So that's awesome. Yeah. I'm sorry if someone's. It's very hard to hear.
Repeat the question.
It's carbon, because you're growing carbon, has to guarantee it can stay there.
Yep.
Have dieback.
Yep.
And it's fallen all over the place. Yes, anyway, just like what does it. Maybe clean up.
I think I know the answer to that. I'm just going to the professor. Hey, Jeff, the question is when you do have dieback and there's debris in the paddock.
Yep.
Is the proponent required to clean it up?
Not as far as I understand. Yeah, I think that's part of the ecosystem. You're trying to create natural habitat as well. Yeah, like that would be against my motivation to do that. Not only is it work, but it's also going counter to establishing a good box gum woodland structure on the ground. But no, there's no such requirement in the Act. Really, it is all about establishing sufficient planting density and forest cover across your site, and maintaining that so that it is still persistent there in 25 or 100 years, depending on the amount of time you elect to, because you can choose if you want to have permanence over a 25-year life cycle, like what most of us have spoken to. You can also elect to take 100 years if you really want. And you get more ACCUs as a result. You get more carbon units for that choice. I took 25 years because it's something I can wrap my head around and I can manage for. But
it's been a learning curve for me, Jeff, because the last 25, 28 years, we put in these tree lots. We wanted density. Melissa, when she gave us grants, we want density. Tom Deary was a mark of success. You and Tom Reed got us lots of trees and tree lots. And suddenly we have this new concept where we want corridors. And that's because, in the sense of being financial driven, with data to back it up. So it's really quite different from the traditional lines of trees for shade, connectivity. It's quite an awakening for me, at least.
Hey, Woody,
Yeah.
there's a couple of questions in the chat. Did you want me to read them, or are you across that?
We've got one in the audience, and then I'll go to chat questions if you're all right, Ron. One in
Yep.
the audience.
My question for Jeff is around whether he undertook the same process eugenics around scenario A and B.
Oh, okay.
So whether his motivation is different, and if he did do it, like what kind of
Jeff, the question is did you look at any alternative to carbon on your place? Like we had the weather, the 350 weather example. Did you have an alternative you
look,
weighed?
thanks for relaying that, because I'm sorry I couldn't hear the question, and I hope I don't misconstrue it. But probably no, not as much as what James would have spoken to or what Chris would have to deal with. Our holding is a small one, and I have off-farm income, so I work as well as farm. So for me, my decision was far less calculated in terms of the cost effectiveness. to be fair, and as I said, I was going to plant this some way or another, somehow, at some point. And at the time, my opportunities to do that were really limited, to voluntary agreements to get seed from places like Greening Australia and essentially give the land up over to that land use. And that may have even compelled me. So I'm probably not the right person to talk to in terms of that aspect, but I just want to be transparent about that. And we have a small holding, so we only have 50 hectares. But I would say that going through this process, and now that I've been through a lot of the costly stages here, and we're about right for most of our trees in the ground, there definitely is a financial argument that I'm quite compelled by in terms of the accus that we've generated. So now we're able to absolutely see this as a justification for like pausing production in a way, like over these periods of establishment, and it allows us the space to breathe and rest the country a little to let those trees recover, and it justifies me removing the stock for maybe even, you know, slightly longer than what I would have done before. The full intent is to bring them back and to farm it productively. I have to pay the mortgage still. I still have this heavy mortgage there, and at the moment we're losing money on it. But in theory, this carbon program will help me. Assuming all the carbon credits come good and they're traded at some point, that will be the main income and drive for this property.
Thanks, Jeff. We'll go to Rowan and the online questions. Sorry, guys, we've just got 5 minutes left. But for those in real life, we can sit around and have some supper and pick their brains more, but the online people can't. Go, Rowan.
First question is from Libby, and essentially the question is, how are you financing the cash flows? So there's a lot of upfront costs, and how are you financing those, given there's the choice between direct farming versus, long deferred carbon credits, when if you need to go to a bank funding is really not fit for purpose for that type of activity. Did you want to answer that, or?
Well,
James or Chris? Yeah.
Well, I think it might be worth Chris answering that, because I think what Chris has been working on is a solution to that. So these documents are all regarding a loan to a producer to support that upfront. We funded ours, we bootstrapped ours, and it's kind of what you do when you're going fairly quickly. But back to my rationale in the presentation, it made economic sense to do that, so we did that. But I think it's worth you just reiterating.
It's a core question. How are you going to fund it? So that's why we've gone through this long process in my relatively small project as you scale up. And if much bigger organizations like Clean Energy Finance Corp gets involved, well, then there's almost no end to it, which is great, because that's where the entire area will succeed. So it's a very pertinent question, and a loan is the way to go. And then no one wants more debt, so can it be non-recourse? And that's been a source of healthy tension. At first, when Woody went fishing, and I said, oh, non-recourse loan. But as we got into it, I realized it can't just be non-recourse. As a farmer, I have to take some responsibility. If it doesn't work, I've got to pay it back no matter what. So we defined the areas where, no, you don't have to pay it back, but generally you do. So you are relying on the carbon credits to pay it back. No carbon credits, it can't be an issue. In our particular agreement, a failure of the carbon credit market does extinguish a loan. This is only draft, so I'm not sure if it'll be a permanent feature. Right. But we need to work out where a farmer can, in a sense, not feel this is yet another burden. You do have to get your bank's permission if you already have a loan on properties. Most of us do. Eligible interest holders, okay. Unless you're taking up a good part of your property, I don't think that'll be an issue. But if it's a major part, and if Wardy or successor to Regen lends you a lot of money and they want security on the property, then you get the traditional problem between the first lender and the second lender. Because even if the first lender's got primary security, they may not want a second mortgage there because that can interrupt things. So that's down the track for much bigger ones. But yes, a loan seems to be the way to go to fund these things.
Might just step in there because we're running out of time and it's coming up to 7 o'clock. But I mentioned Regen Farmers Mutual. We're owned by our members and we respond to our members' needs, which in the case of open woodland restoration, the most obvious need is how do you bridge that long repayment and those upfront costs? And what we're hoping to do by working with Chris on his 30 hectares and templating up the agreements is to identify solution to a common problem. And if it's just Chris yelling out into the wilderness to banks to give us a carbon-backed or carbon-secured loan, one bank, one customer, maybe it'll happen. A whole community of customers with a systematized process for establishing open woodland, well, then you start entering into institution scale, and the institutions like governments, Clean Energy Finance Corporation, RIC, you might be familiar with regional concessional loans, etc. These are perpetual, long-dated, cyclical funding agreements that farmers need in this situation. So we are, as Regen Farmers Mutual, a vehicle advocating and trying to find the solution to help farmers gather the scale to get institutions like our governments, be they state or federal, involved in catalysing the funding, knowing that those loans will be repaid by the carbon that the New South Wales government and the federal government want to see in the landscape anyway. So that's the position that we're heading to as an organisation. We're now running over. Do you want to do one last question from the online, Rowan? Do we have time, or should I call it a wrap?
Maybe the one last thing to say is that the co-design sessions that are coming up are designed to help us answer these questions in more detail, in the sense of the question about the finance, that'll be directly addressed in one of those co-design sessions where we've been given money by the New South Wales government. They would like to systematise this open woodland restoration approach. One of the challenges we need to solve is the funding. So as we move through this project, we're going to be going through in a way that we bring the government folk along, and you can join in to understand, how that question about the financing can and is being addressed. Because like the long and short of it is we need more fit for purpose funding than what's currently available. And so the government's aware of it, and you can participate in those co-design sessions. So Woody, I was just going to say that you might just want to finalise with what's the call to action from this meeting today for the folk online?
For everybody online, please fill out the survey, including in there as a question if you'd like to participate in the expressions of interest for the co-design. So online, please go through the QR code or through that link and complete the survey. For you guys in real life, please stick around, have a cup of tea, have a slice of fruit. Some of us will be going for dinner. Thank you for your kind attention and interest in this today. This is yet another story of open woodlands restoration stories. And I'm going to finish off with something that may be a bit naff, but when I look at open woodland restoration, I have to write it out a whole bunch of times. So it becomes really simple to abbreviate it to OWR, like hour. And then I kind of got excited by the homophone between OWR, open woodland restoration, and our collective story that is open woodland restoration. So I'd love you to come and join us and create more stories this evening as you explore with Jim and Chris and anybody else who's had a role, what their story has been and what your story could be. Thank you. Thank you, everybody online. Big thank you to Chris and Jim and Jeff for your inputs. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
That's a pleasure, Wardy, and thanks everyone for having us and me. And I can see I've only just now found the questions in the chat, so I might try my best to answer a couple of those anyway, because I know I probably didn't answer some of them. So
Thank you, Jeff.
thanks very much. All right.
We'll take an FAQ from the questions.
Okay, great. All right.
Thanks, guys. Hey, Rowan, can you copy paste the chat and put it into Slack so we've got it for afterwards?
Yep, just don't close down just yet then.
I won't shut it down just yet. Did I press stop record or you did?